This has been an amazing panel discussion. If we think of racism as a multi-headed monster, we've been able to understand some of the different iterations of racism, how it impacts Chinese people and Asian Americans in different communities, in different settings, those on college campuses, those who are researchers, those who are doing business, people who are just going about their everyday life. If you're not Chinese, if you're not Asian American, you might not know, might not feel, might not realize the depth and the breadth of the racism that's been generated by this new war drive against China. You might not know, for instance, that Bay Area businesses, Chinese American businesses, have been targeted by arson, that those who dare have the Chinese flag visible have been vandalized. People might not know that there are FBI investigations against Chinese nationals now in all 50 states. People might not realize the level of discrimination and predatory attacks against Chinese scientists and researchers. This panel has been important because it's pulled together the different threads of the racism that's being imposed on the Chinese American and Asian American community. We have to think of this as a war not only against China or a war drive against China, but it is a drive against Chinese people. My organization, Act Now to Stop War and End Racism, was founded 3 days after September 11th attacks in 2001. We tried to make the point that we needed to resist the cynical use of the government trying to take advantage of the grief and rage from the September 11th attacks to channel that grief and rage into a campaign for new wars in the Middle East. Wars, it turns out, that were taking place against predominantly Muslim people. A campaign of victimization directed against Muslim Americans and South Asians and Arab Americans. All of that happened after the September 11th attack. The war drive against China, as we heard from our panelists, is also a drive, a racist campaign against Chinese people. We have to build a bridge of solidarity. We have to also understand the genesis of this campaign and also the genesis or the origin of the war against China. There's the old cliche that truth is the first casualty of war. In this case, in the approach of a new war, in the approach of a new major power conflict between the United States and China, the truth has been trampled in so many different areas. China is blamed for COVID-19. China is blamed for not telling the world about COVID-19. China is blamed by the Trump administration and by the president himself of perhaps having created the virus. China is blamed for the 50 to 60 million Americans who had to file unemployment insurance claims since March. China is blamed for the 200,000 plus Americans who died as a result of COVID, as a result of the utter incompetence and neglect and criminal failures of this government to protect its own citizens. China is a convenient scapegoat. And at the same time, the military-industrial complex, which one of the speakers mentioned, takes 60% of the discretionary budget of the national treasury each year. And the war spending is really about $1 trillion. That kind of spending can only be justified too if the United States has a sufficient enemy. Iraq is not big enough. Libya not big enough. Syria not big enough. The United States, in order to justify the looting of the national treasury by these war contractors, by those who profit off of death and destruction, it needs a pretext. It needs a rationale. And thus, China provides what the military-industrial complex needs, a global enemy to take the place of the Soviet Union. So here you have animus and hatred directed against China and as a collateral damage against Chinese Americans and Asian Americans. One, as a pretext to justify the government's own failures. It needs a pretext to justify a war buildup, the ABCs of which are making vast sums of new profit for war contractors. The attack against China and the animus against China and the hostility thus against Chinese Americans and Asian Americans is a convenient tool by those who have power. And sadly, the corporate-owned media functions as an echo chamber, repeating these lies over and over and over again, such that American people have been told to believe them as if they are an article of faith. If you have a religious belief in something, you may not need facts. An article of faith is just that, faith alone. And we have in the United States the other big sort of part of the picture of racism, which is the economic underpinning of racist ideology, racist institutions, and racist culture. When you think about the rise or formation of white supremacy in the United States or in North America, how did it begin? It became as an ideological expression and an institutionalized practice by a group of very rich people who enslaved other people, enslaved, kidnapped African people, and could only justify the institution of slavery by creating and promoting and enforcing a system of white supremacy. That's why white supremacist ideas took root, and that's why they have been so enduring. Now we have in the White House a failed businessman, Donald Trump, who fancies himself the great negotiator, but who in fact is a failed businessman who over and over and over again crashed his own businesses, had to rely on big banks and government largesse to bail him out, literally from his own bankruptcy, is now telling the American people that TikTok and Huawei and WeChat are a great threat to national security, when in fact this failed businessman is really making the case for those American businesses that have been beaten out at the marketplace, the much vaunted marketplace, by Chinese technology companies. They brought to market a product that succeeded. And so the United States economic interests, the same banks and corporations, want to stop those companies. And so you have the Trump administration engaged in highfalutin modern day piracy when it comes to TikTok, when it has the kidnapping of Huawei's chief financial officer in coordination with the Canadian government. Beneath all of these attacks that are justified on the basis of national security and all of the attendant racist notions that go with them is really an economic interest of elites in America, and especially corporate and banking elites who don't want the Chinese companies and corporations that have created new products that are successful from being able to take part of their market share. It is in fact an economic war dressed up as a campaign to defend the American people from a Chinese adversary. And thus national security is used cynically to trick and fool the American people to be part of a campaign of hatred against China and Chinese American people. And the American people get nothing in return. The benefactors of this process are in fact the corporate and banking elites and the military industrial complex. Pivot to Peace exists because we demand that there be an actual discussion and an informed debate so that the American people can be disabused of the lies that they are being spoon-fed by the media and the government. We are carrying out a campaign from the grassroots. We think there's no project more important. Nothing is more important than stopping World War III, which is what major power conflict is a euphemism for. The road to peace, as we said in the title of this webinar, is not simply to oppose war, but to oppose injustice. The road to peace is to bridge solidarity, to reach and extend a hand to the Chinese American and Asian American community and tell that community and those peoples you are not alone, that we stand with you, that as human beings, we are part of one human family. And this human family can either succeed and thrive together through cooperation and the rejection of the poison of racism, or it will be consumed in flames by a new major power conflagration. If you agree with our message, if you want to build this movement, if you want to show your support, as Judge Julie Tang said at the very outset, go to our website. It's peacepivot.org. Peacepivot.org. Sign the mission statement. Say that you are for peace, not war with China. If you can help our movement grow, make a donation. It's tax deductible. This is the grassroots. We have no corporate backing. We have no big financiers. We are from the people, but of course we believe in the people. We believe, in fact, that there is no power greater than the power of the people. Once the people have learned, have been educated, have been mobilized, there is no power greater. That's our political perspective in a nutshell. That's our strategy, and that's our tactic. A grassroots movement of opposition demanding a pivot to peace, not a pivot to war. Thank you.